Shortly after giving birth to a baby girl, this woman would be thrown into an investigation revealing the dark side of healthcare. This is the Susan Horton story. Hi, Meghan.
Always an enticing intro there. I sit and go, do I know it? Do I not? Hi, it's good to see you. Let's first say hi.
Yes, hello. Now that we're doing the Reconsidered and going back through our old catalog, the Hi Meghan, Hi Amy has been it's so consistent. I don't know how we get the exact tone of voice always the same, right? I feel like you could take it from 5 years ago and it's exactly the same. It's incredible.
I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but yeah, we're consistent.
It's a wonderful thing.
Oh, that's cute.
It's good to see you today, as always.
Yes.
So as I have done in the past, today I chose a story that will provide the context for a much larger conversation.
I mean, you said dark side of healthcare, and she just gave birth, so I'm very curious where you're going with this.
Well, let's go ahead and get into the story then. Susan Horton was a stay-at-home mom who resided in Santa Rosa, which is in Northern California. Mm-hmm. She lived with her husband and her 4 children. In August of 2022, she and her husband went to the Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Santa Rosa, where she gave birth to her 5th child, a baby girl named Haley.
5 children. It's funny. I hear people say that and I go, I am struggling with one here.
They say it gets easier.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that after you, once you have a third, anything more a third and beyond is no big deal.
Well, then you have help. I think little helpers,
I guess
maybe.
If the kids are older, but
yeah. Okay.
Anyway, Haley was a beautiful, healthy baby girl, and the family was overjoyed to welcome this new addition. However, only hours after the birth, Susan was told that her urine tested positive for opiates.
Oh.
And she was dumbfounded. She had never taken an illegal drug at all in her life.
Oh, I know what this is now.
And not only did she not ever take an illegal drug, she didn't even have an epidural or any narcotic pain medication during labor. In fact, she said she barely even took over-the-counter meds for pain.
She didn't take an
epidural.
How some
people, you know how some people just don't feel comfortable? I'm not me. I take medication for everything.
I know.
But there are people that don't even feel comfortable taking an Advil for a headache. And that's who she was.
Yeah, I have a good friend like that, actually, as well, who also did natural childbirth twice.
I don't understand it. Well, yeah. I'm pretty sure this woman did it 5 times.
Wow, that's incredible.
Susan recalled asking the nurse, "Are you sure it was mine?" Because she figured this had to be a mix-up. Maybe the urine had been mislabeled. So they gave her a second test, which strangely revealed the same findings. Mm-hmm. And as per hospital protocol, the situation was quickly escalated.
Wow.
Before they knew it, a social worker arrived in their room and informed the couple that their newborn would have to be closely monitored for 5 days. And this is to look for potential withdrawal symptoms. On top of this, the parents would not be able to be with her.
Oh, my gosh. What year was this, Amy?
2022.
Oh, wow. This just happened. Okay.
This just happened. Yeah. Now, as all of this was going on, Susan recalled that the night before she gave birth, she had eaten a salad with poppy seed dressing. Now, I would have never thought of this, but Susan realized this and she told the nurse because it occurred to her that poppy seeds, like the one in her salad, are derived from the opium poppy plant. And they contained codeine. Now, codeine is an opioid, and that is the kind that showed up in Susan's urine.
Right.
And
wow.
As I learned through my research for today's case, to differentiate between poppy seeds and illicit drugs, toxicologists often recommend testing urine for the presence of a different compound, which would be found in poppy seeds, but not in opioids.
So did they test her? Did they give her a different test?
It's unclear if the hospital knew about this at all. But regardless, California law, unlike many other states, which we will definitely have a discussion about, requires more than just a positive drug test to officially accuse a parent of drug use.
Well, what else do they require?
This is the problem. Susan had missed several prenatal appointments. Now, missing prenatal appointments are considered a red flag for drug abuse. Ooh. So because of those 2 factors, the hospital social worker moved forward with the case, which essentially meant taking the brand new baby away from her parents and put into protective custody.
Oh, God. Okay.
And Susan admitted that she did miss a few appointments. And she says it was because she was concerned over COVID-19. And this is a valid concern because one of her older children had a medical condition. So the family was extremely cautious.
She probably also had done it so many times. I bet she had a feeling of like knowing. I was of course at every appointment because I was a first-time mom, but I bet she was kind of like also, her instincts probably kicked in telling her that she was okay as well.
I thought of that as well, that if it was her first child, would she have done that? Now, some people say, COVID was under control by 2022. Although many people were no longer as concerned, there was still a lot of worry among immunocompromised individuals.
Yeah.
And there's also reports that Susan's husband also had a pre-existing condition.
Okay.
As any parents would be, Susan and her husband were extremely angry about what was happening. In fact, her husband even called the police for help.
Yeah. I mean, like the hospital's kidnapping my baby. Like who do you call? Right.
Unfortunately, the police were not helpful. In fact, they asked to search the couple's home and to perform interviews with their family and friends. Now, the Hortons refused. In fact, Susan's husband became quite combative, as I think most people would be.
Yeah.
As you said, the hospital is kidnapping their child.
Yeah.
Since the Hortons were refusing to allow the police to search the home and telling them they couldn't talk to their other children or other family members, the social worker secured a court order and placed the newborn with her grandparents, with a stipulation that the Hortons were not allowed to be alone with their brand new baby.
I mean, at the very least, she was with the family members,
And this was after she was done remember, they also wanted to watch the baby for withdrawal symptoms. Yeah. So this was after that period of time.
And I'm assuming there was no symptoms or anything. She was a healthy baby. So then they're placing her with the grandparents and...
Yes, at least that's better than putting the baby into, custody with the state.
That's what I was saying. Like, at least she was with their family and at least they did have access to her. I mean, at the very least, it's still awful.
A few days later, while still recovering from her delivery, Susan sat in court as the caseworker claimed that her alleged drug use posed a danger to her young child. And Susan just wanted to regain custody. Can you imagine the hormones that you feel after giving birth and then dealing with this? So Susan said, okay, give me another drug test, search my home, basically said, do whatever you need to do. I want my baby back.
It's a very different situation, but my daughter, Hannah, was born premature and she was in the NICU for 3 weeks and it was devastating to me.
And you were allowed to be with her. Can you imagine?
I was allowed to be with her the whole time, all the time. But eventually I had to leave without her. And there is nothing worse than leaving without your newborn baby. So I can imagine a little bit how bad this was.
After nearly 2 weeks, the Child Welfare Agency decided to withdraw its petition and the judge dismissed the case. Now, I'm going to assume that the drug test that she took again, they were able to do a more sensitive toxicology report, and they were able to see that it was, in fact, the poppy seeds and not opioids. Mm-hmm. And also, I don't believe the home search yielded anything because there was no evidence of drug use or any abuse towards her children. At 2 weeks old, baby Haley was finally reunited with her parents. And again, the only explanation Susan could think of for this awful situation was that poppy seed salad dressing.
What a freak awful thing.
Now, what I find really interesting is if Susan had been tested under different circumstances, in other words, she was tested after giving birth. Yeah. But let's say she was being tested as a federal employee or just any other job, she would have been entitled to a more advanced test and to get a review from a specially trained doctor to confirm the results.
Yeah.
But she wasn't afforded this because she was considered just a regular person. So in other words, people who get drug tests for jobs are afforded more, I don't know if you could say more rights or more, further investigation than women who give birth.
I mean, what happened here? Did they file a lawsuit? Something's got to happen, right?
Okay, well, the hospital declined to comment on Susan's case specifically. However, in a statement, it said that the hospital typically gets consent to drug test patients for medical reasons. And as a mandated reporter under state law, it refers potential exposures to illicit drugs in newborns to child welfare authorities. So basically, they're saying, and actually the Sonoma County Human Services Department also put out a public statement saying that it evaluates all referrals using evidence and research-based methods. And if a report is deemed valid, it has the duty under state law to investigate. So basically, they're saying they were doing their due diligence, and what they did was according to protocol. However, I think the protocol is the issue, and we're going to talk a lot about the protocol when we get to the discussion.
Okay.
I mean, there are many women who go through similar situations, so I want to talk about 2 other examples that were similar to Susan's.
Okay.
The first is a woman named Grace Smith, who had her 4th child in 2021 at St. Luke's University Hospital. That's about an hour north of Philadelphia.
I know, because that's where I delivered.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That exact hospital?
I don't know if it's, there's a couple different campuses, so it might be, I'm not sure if that was the exact campus, but I delivered at St. Luke's.
This is like the time you didn't know where I was born, remember? You didn't know what state I was born in, and I gave you crap. I didn't know where you had your baby, so we're even.
All right, there we go.
So this particular woman had been taking prescribed marijuana and Vyvanse, which is a medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, this particular medication contains amphetamine, but the hospital's drug screening results did not differentiate between methamphetamine and amphetamine, which there's a difference.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Now, there are many tests that do differentiate, but this particular test given to this woman after birth did not. So the day after she delivered her son, a doctor told her that she and her baby had tested positive for meth and that the hospital had notified Child Protective Services.
Oh.
Now, what I consider very problematic in this case is this doctor was not her regular doctor. The family had very recently moved to the area. So they said, okay, this isn't a big deal. Go ahead and call my OB because my OB prescribed those 2 medications, the marijuana and the ADHD medication. So they said, call this doctor and they will confirm that these medications were prescribed. The doctor at the hospital did not do that. In fact, the family then asked the doctor to just look at medical records to confirm her prescription. But the doctor argued that reviewing medical records was not her role.
Oh my gosh.
The doctor went on to say that it was their responsibility as healthcare workers to report the case to child welfare authorities, saying that it was up to the agency to conduct any investigation that was necessary. Which, listen, I don't disagree. A doctor's job is not to investigate. The doctor's job is duty to report potential abuse to a child, and then it's the agency's job to then investigate it.
But wouldn't it have been nice if she had the information even to report? Like, yes, I found this, but I just want you to know, here's the caveat. Just so, like, it sets up a fair investigation? I don't know.
Yeah, and also the implication is that these couples have to leave without their newborn babies.
So this is interesting to me, though. I actually have not heard of an OB prescribing marijuana for a pregnant woman. Have you ever heard that before?
I have not, but I don't know if it was her OB that prescribed it or the OB was just aware of it. But she was told by her OB that it was better in her situation for the health of her and her baby to remain on both of those medications throughout pregnancy.
I see. Okay.
So in other words, that OB did give doctors orders that these 2 medications, the marijuana and the ADHD drugs, were okay for her to take.
Okay.
Now, Grace and her husband told the doctor they were leaving with their baby. And the doctor said, no, you're not. And the hospital called the police. An officer arrived and escorted the parents out without their newborn baby, telling them that they would be arrested if they returned.
Wow.
And I heard an interview with this woman, and she was hysterical, saying how embarrassing it was to be escorted through the hospital, screaming for their child, and the police saying, if you don't leave, you will be arrested.
Sure, it was embarrassing and heartbreaking.
4 days after the Smith son was born, Monroe County Children and Youth Services completed their investigation and told the hospital it was now okay to release the baby to his parents. Unbelievably, the investigation remained opened, and it wasn't until the family paid more than $3,500 for a lawyer and then almost $300 for a confirmation drug test that, of course, came back negative. Then the agency closed their case. So not only did this family lose 4 days with their newborn baby, they had to pay out of their own pocket to get this resolved and to get the case closed.
That's unbelievable. It's even closer to me than I realized. You said Monroe County. I'm in Monroe County, so she delivered somewhere closer to me. The St. Luke's has a lot of campuses.
No, that's where they lived, I believe. But I think you gave birth at the same hospital.
I think we did too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh.
The Smiths went ahead and filed a lawsuit against St. Luke's, and in response, the hospital acknowledged that it had not given Grace a confirmation test, but denied violating Smith's privacy or civil rights. a judge would go ahead and dismiss the lawsuit in 2023, saying in part that the Smiths did not sufficiently argue their claims.
Oh, man. Okay.
Okay, let's move on to our other example. If you're not angry enough, let's continue. This one is about a nurse from South Carolina by the name of Ashley Riley. And ironically, as part of her job, Ashley regularly drug tested patients in an addiction treatment program. She also was in charge of flagging faulty tests and sent out positive screens for confirmation.
Oh, that seems ironic for what's about to happen. Okay.
She could have never guessed that after delivering her son in 2023, she screened positive for opioids. The hospital declined to order a confirmation test, though she asked for one because she knew what she was talking about. Because she was not given a confirmation test, they reported her to authorities. And Ashley and her husband, Jeffrey, insisted that the positive result was from lemon poppy seed muffins because that's what she ate throughout her whole pregnancy.
Oh, man.
And as proof, her husband, Jeffrey, even texted the investigators a receipt for the muffins and studies on false positives caused by poppy seeds. I mean, the fact that investigators didn't think this was enough, get this, besides sending that information, he also sent a 2023 memo from the Department of Defense that urged service members to avoid poppy seeds due to false positives on drug tests.
Wow. And what happened?
The caseworker still insisted that the couple sign a safety plan advising them that their 2 children would be placed in foster care unless they assigned a protector. Now, this would be a responsible adult who would supervise them with their children at all times.
What? For how long?
It continued for 45 days until the case was closed as unfounded.
That's crazy. Oh, my God, that's crazy.
Can you believe that?
No.
45 days. Their other children were affected as well.
No, that's awful.
Ashley Riley said, essentially, they were guilty until proven innocent.
That's too bad.
The hospital even charged the couple over $400 for the problematic urine test.
Oh, my gosh. Insult to injury there.
So there's many examples like these. And if you're interested, I urge you to check out revealnews.org.
Mm-hmm.
So Reveal actually has a podcast. They have 2 podcast episodes on these topics.
Oh, okay.
That's how I first heard of these cases.
Oh.
So I would definitely suggest them. There's interviews with all 3 of these women, and you can hear them actually tell their story. Okay, so now, how do these cases keep happening? It's a big question here.
I mean, it seems like science just hasn't caught up. Or not science, people haven't caught up with the science, maybe.
Well, yes. I think you're right. I think the science is a big part. But let's start with the legal side of things.
Yeah.
Because state and federal laws require hospitals across the country to identify newborns potentially affected by drugs in the womb.
Right.
And of course, to then refer them to Child Protective Services for investigation. And I think we can all agree this is usually good practice.
I mean, usually, yes.
But there's issues in implementation, as there usually is.
Mm-hmm.
So for starters, hospitals often use urine drug screens that are inexpensive and simple to administer.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, a patient pees in a cup, and there are quick results. Results will be provided in minutes. Now, while this is convenient and cost-effective, these tests can be problematic because they can be incorrectly interpreted, and they have a higher incidence of false positive rates.
Right.
Actually, in fact, one of the studies I read said that the false positive rate is as high as 50%.
50? 50?
50.
Whoa.
And as we've seen in our few examples here, false positives can lead hospitals to wrongly accuse parents of illicit drug use and report babies to child welfare agencies, separating newborn babies from their mothers during the most important bonding time after birth.
Yeah.
Now, watchdogs, including the ACLU, have been investigating this problem for years, and they've been calling for better protections for mothers and their children.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, we just don't know the scope of the problem. Now, there's about 3.6 million births every year, and it's just not clear how many involve drug testing. I mean, some healthcare experts claim that urine screening is universal, but we just don't know for sure. In other words, like, do you know if you were tested? I don't know if I was. I'm assuming.
That's funny you said that. I was thinking that. I have no idea.
I'm assuming if the urine comes back clean, you just don't know because they're testing for so much after you give birth.
Yeah.
But I don't really know. Some reports indicate that tens of thousands of infants are reported annually to authorities for in utero drug exposure. And again, You don't know how many of those were done with inaccurate tests or with, toxicology reports that weren't read correctly. So this is very problematic because
the other problem is also, even if you call for like double confirmation testing, if it's a result of something like poppy seeds or another ingredient that's ticking off, the opioid results, what's the protocol then? I don't know.
Well, remember, if it's a sensitive test, a confirmation tests right. are more sensitive. They could distinguish between. But that's the problem with using these inexpensive tests, is that they don't distinguish between the difference between the opioids and the poppy seed.
Oh, so the problem is a monetary one. So it's almost like a simple not a simple solution, but is a more simple solution just using better tests and spending more money?
It seems like it, or doing that extra step of confirmation, investigating a bit further before getting protective services involved. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, no government agency collects comprehensive data on false positive results, or again, even how many pregnant women are even tested. Now, what makes this very difficult is confidentiality laws.
Yeah.
We know that the healthcare confidentiality laws, as they should be, are very stringent, but this also makes it difficult for the public to understand how many people are affected by these practices.
Absolutely.
One of the most widely cited publicized studies was conducted by the Marshall Project. Now, the Marshall Project, for those of you who don't know, is an American nonprofit news organization, and they cover the U.S. criminal justice system, or, as more recently has been renamed, to the legal system.
The renames are so hard at this point.
It's hard to keep up. Yes. The Marshall Project works to impact the system through journalism, and their mission is to create and sustain a sense of national urgency around inequalities within the U.S. system, which they do incredible work. I'm assuming you know.
I love the Marshall Project. I get like a lot of my reading and films from them, too.
Yes, they're incredible. As you may or may not know, the organization is named after Thurgood Marshall. But a fun fact that I did not know was that the organization is the youngest to win a Pulitzer Prize, which it has done twice.
I didn't know that.
So anyway, so what did they do here? Well, the Marshall Project, and they teamed up with Reveal, and they also teamed up with Mother Jones and some other organizations to investigate this problem. Now, they interviewed dozens of patients, medical providers, toxicologists, and other experts, and they collected information on more than 50 mothers in 22 states. Now, these women had varying backgrounds and ethnicities. The one thing they did have in common, though, is that they all faced reports and investigations over positive drug tests that were likely wrong. In addition to these interviews, they examined thousands of pages of policy documents from every state child welfare agency in the country.
Wow.
While it's well known that there are problems in drug screens, it's usually focused on workplace testing. It's kind of a newer area of inquiry to look at drug testing after giving birth.
Yeah.
But again, it is crucial that we know how easily these false positives can occur inside labor and delivery units, and also who is being affected.
Right.
And it is becoming more well known now that hospitals have reported women for positive drug tests after they ate everything bagels, lemon poppy seed muffins, have used medications including acid reducers like Zantac, antidepressants like Zoloft, and labetalol, one of the most commonly prescribed blood pressure treatments for pregnant women.
Oh, wow.
And as reported by Reveal News, federal officials have known for decades that urine screens are not reliable. Remember, I mentioned the Department of Defense clearly knew.
Yeah.
So poppy seeds are notorious for causing false positives in drug tests.
I mean, if this is so well known, like, why can't we change the procedure? I just don't get it.
Regardless of all this evidence, the Marshall Project reported that many hospitals treat drug screens as concrete evidence of illicit drug use, and hospitals across the country routinely report these cases to authorities without ordering confirmation tests.
That's a shame.
It's such a shame. So many people are affected by this. Now, the Marshall Project went on to say that at least 27 states explicitly require hospitals to alert child welfare agencies after a positive screen, but not a single state requires hospitals to confirm test results before reporting them.
Oh, that's a problem for me as well.
And don't worry, it gets worse. To me, this is even more shocking. At least 25 states do not require child welfare workers to confirm positive test results.
What do you mean?
In other words, they don't even, in these 25 states, they don't even make them do confirmation testing. They can just go down the path of taking away people's children.
No, wow, I had no idea the extent of this kind of problem. I didn't even know this was a serious problem, maybe.
And as much as we need to be aware of this issue and, of course, work to remedy it, you know, what we always do on this show is we always want to point out the importance of the other side.
Yeah.
We certainly want to keep protections for babies who have potentially been exposed to illicit drugs in utero. And testing for drugs can alert doctors to potential withdrawal symptoms. So babies' lives are being saved by these protocols.
Right.
And I think we can all agree, we don't want to send a potentially drug-addicted newborn home.
Yeah.
And not to mention, hospitals can face severe criminal and legal liability if they fail to report a positive test result. So we can't blame the hospitals for erring on the side of caution in these cases.
No.
But for the new mothers who are incorrectly accused of drug use, the situation can become a traumatic legal nightmare. Mm-hmm. Now, while this is still an emerging issue and one that I expect we'll hear a lot more about, there have been some responses at the federal level over the past decade.
Oh, okay.
In 2016, Congress mandated states to submit the number of substance-affected infants to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Not all states track every case, but from fiscal years 2018 through 2022, medical professionals reported at least 170,000 infants to child welfare agencies. And this is for exposure to substances. Now, again, we don't know how many of those were false positives.
Right.
In 2022 alone, more than 35,000 such cases were reported, and authorities removed more than 6,000 infants from their families.
Wow. Okay. But how many of those is there a follow-up on that? Like they were removed, but how many were reinstated for there's no number beyond that,
Unfortunately, this is the problem with the record keeping. It's just not clear.
Okay.
But I think just from these few stories, I think it shows that it's happening. And even if it's happening to just a few families, although I suspect it's many more, it's a few too many.
I agree.
And as with many of the policies in our country, the harms of drug testing protocol are probably falling disproportionately on low-income minority communities.
I'm sure.
Studies have found that minority women, Black, Hispanic, and Native American, are more likely to be tested when they give birth. These women are also more likely to be investigated, and they are less likely to be reunited with their children after the child has been removed.
But I bet there's not, the research doesn't show that they're more likely to be using substances.
Nope, not that I could find.
Right.
But I do want to note, just for fairness of all sides, the Marshall Project research that I discussed, it included false positive cases from all socioeconomic classes and occupations. Mm-hmm. So they did not find a discrepancy between demographics. So while some studies do, some don't.
Okay.
But we see that across all studies, right? Some studies are going to show that the longer one's incarcerated, the lower the recidivism, and some states are going to show the opposite.
Yeah, but usually when I'm explaining on some of these issues, I like to go with the majority of the research. So it's what the majority of reputable, well-done research shows, we hope.
And as researchers, we know about selection bias. So the women who chose to come forward and tell their stories for the podcast and for some of these publications, yes, they were a lawyer, a nurse, people that seemed to be middle class. I believe actually all three of them were white women.
Okay.
It's also possible that white women feel more comfortable coming forward to tell their story.
Sure, absolutely.
Than minority women do.
Yeah.
So we have to point that out too. So while there is definitely bias on many levels in this problem, that's not the only issue. For Susan Horton, the system certainly did not get it right. And I hope that this case brings awareness to our listeners, and this attention will help spread the word about this issue that I certainly was not aware of.
The only thing I knew about this topic was that if a woman is suspected of use and if tested and the baby tests positive, that the baby would be taken away pending further action, pending an investigation and, further action, basically. But I didn't know about the problem of false positives. I wouldn't even thought it would be on my, radar of separation of families and certainly of, I guess, lack of procedure Well, it sounds like there's a lot of procedure, but I guess lack of procedural adjustments to prevent
Yes, it seems like there is, although there might be many different procedures that need to be revised, it seems at least one very clear one is to be using more sensitive toxicology screens.
Yeah.
And while it would cost the system more money, I think it's worth it when we look at the cost benefit of it.
I think so too.
Hopefully, we'll start to see some more policy changes in the coming years that will keep newborns safe, but at the same time will not cause undue trauma and inappropriate custody issues in the process.
I wonder what our rights are too. Like as a mother and as someone who's being treated in the hospital, is it just assumed that I'm criminal, that I'm harming my child? So you're saying we don't know about testing, who they're testing and who they're not, or in some of these states? Was that a fair assessment?
I would bet. You know how you sign so much paperwork when you're in the hospital?
Yes.
I bet you if you really read the big stack of forms that you signed, it probably says it somewhere in there that they'll be testing for something.
Are we just assumed, though? Is there no protection, I guess, either for our right to privacy or not privacy, but our right to be not treated as a criminal? I'm just curious. Is it like a situation where if there's probable cause for drug testing, they're doing it? That makes more sense to me than just blanket drug testing.
There is a slippery slope here, right? Because at some point, we're getting into the fact where like the government's stepping in and kind of invading privacy. And if they don't have probable cause to think that we're harming our child, do they have the right? But then the other side is, protecting children at all costs. So it's like that balance.
Yeah.
I don't know how we find that balance. Again, we want to keep babies safe, but we don't want to invade people's privacy.
I don't know how we find the balance either. This is a new area. So normally I think I would pipe in like, oh yeah, I have an idea about bail or I have an idea about this, but this is, and kind of blew my mind on this one because I just had no idea about this topic at all. So good job on that one.
Also, if you or someone you know is facing mental and/or substance abuse issues, there is always help. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA, they have a national helpline that is free, confidential, 24/7, 365 days a year. They also have treatment referral information in both English and Spanish. They could be reached at 1-800-662-HELP. One more resource. The American Psychological Association has a very comprehensive list of treatment centers and resources for pregnant substance-using women and girls. We will include that link in our show notes.
I think that's great. I think we should. But what do you do if your problem is that you just like everything bagels?
I mean, again, have tests that are not so sensitive because there are more expensive tests that can distinguish the different compounds.
All right. Well, I hope that's something we see. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we head out today, though, we have a question from a listener.
Oh.
This was an email from Kathy G. Kathy asks, what impact do you think public opinion has on criminal justice policy?
Ooh, wow.
And actually, I'm going to take this a step further. I'm going to add my own part to this question is not only what impact it has on policy, but how does it influence decision making? I think is an interesting addition.
Right.
Would you like to start?
Well, I would say that's a great question. I also think it's a question that is relative. So it depends where you are. It depends on the timing. What era are we in? Are we in an era where we're tough on crime or where we're in, a restorative mode? Are we in the bail reform movement era? And so did public opinion move the ball on those, or did legislators come first in a lot of these areas? So it's a complicated answer is what I'm saying. I do think public opinion can impact a case, especially when people are involved with congressmen, when they lobby, when there's press. I definitely see public opinion moving policy. But I think it's I think it's totally relative. And I think it varies on time to time, place to place, and what issues are of the moment or important in the landscape.
You pretty much touched on everything I would have said. The only thing I'll add is public opinion. The public votes to put people in office, and they're voting on, a lot of people who are running for office are running on certain platforms for certain issues.
Right.
So a public opinion, if it's strong in a certain area, then that's going to swing the vote. You would think, right?
I would.
Yeah. It's such a good question.
Yeah.
I love our listeners. They're so smart.
I mean, I teach a whole policy class, so I can tell you, like, policies, most policies are decided also, just so you know, in like emotional response or
not good policy though.
No,
correct?
Not good policy. Mm-hmm. So most of our policies in criminal justice are not good policies anyway. Most of them will fail. And most are decided, it could be public opinion or it could be the response to a public event. But policies really should be much more thought out, planned, and should have the input of not just law enforcement, but many different areas, so for communities to participate and service providers and business owners, it should be everyone kind of comes to the table. That's how good or better policy with, an eye on the root cause of a problem.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Kathy, for that really interesting question.
Thank you.
And as always, if you have a question for us, please feel free to message us at womenandcrimepodcast.com/contact. And as a reminder, if you're a patron at the Lifer tier, your question will be guaranteed to be read on air. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time on Women and Crime.
Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonzo. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.
Sources for today's episode include Reveal Podcast, The Marshall Project, The New York Post, The Los Angeles Times, RevealNews.org, and Mother Jones.